I was recently looking through my games collection for something that I haven't really played or finished that I might like to do a review of. Originally, I had thought about getting around to completing and reviewing Panzer Dragoon Saga, but I decided against it as it is often cited as the best the Sega Saturn has to offer, and as such already has a preconceived status of having top marks. Although personally I think Shining the Holy Ark is the best game on the Sega Saturn, and here's a controversial opinion, I like it more than Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, come and get me, nerds. Anyway, I came to the conclusion to go in the opposite direction and review a Saturn game that you might not only have never heard of, but something that when referenced is often referred to as the almighty arse biscuit. The Saturn had originally aspired to be the perfect 2D gaming console, but due to the rising demand of 3D gaming and the inevitable arrival of the Sony PlayStation, quick alterations had to be made to compensate for 3D gaming, leaving the Sega Saturn as a complicated dual-core architectural mess, not ideal for game developers at the time. I had been impressed with the Sega Saturn upon release. The progression of computers in our household had previously ascended from Mega CD to Acorn Archimedes, so when I was presented with the Sega Saturn launch titles such as Virtua Fighter and Panzer Dragoon, any excitement I had was only exacerbated. However, these were launch titles, and if you were a smart company you would put your best stock in the window and leave the rotting shite in the back room. Being not far off a decade old at the time meant I couldn't exactly stride into any game shop and buy all the games I wanted. Instead, every Friday I would have to head down to the software shack and rent one. I actually found this membership card by chance the other morning, which brought back quite a few fond memories. I think the place is now a fucking tanning salon, and I've checked, they don't sell Duke Nukem 3D posters anymore. The very first Saturn game I rented was Mansion of Hidden Souls, which I thought would be some sort of survival horror puzzle game along the lines of Darkseid meets Clock Tower. Instead, it turned out to be a fairly mundane semi-point-and-click adventure game where you followed around a butterfly for 3 hours and then it was over. Having had my fingers burnt the first time, I decided this time around I was going to make sure I got something more involved, so when I spotted this on the shelf, I knew I was in for something good. Just look at this box. You have a demon, a knight brandishing a flame sword, and some hooded fella. Now we're talking. Although why they're glowing red like they're about to melt, I never really figured out. Flipping the box over, we are treated to the screenshots, which look impressive for the time. The guy looked real, and who could resist a game where the first words in the blurb were killer trees? Although the next two words are deadly dragons, and I completed this game for the review and didn't see a single bloody dragon. T&E software, you lying swines. I should point out at this point that I'm using the SFF emulator for this review, and it isn't that I'm using a ROM or don't own a Sega Saturn console, I actually have two, but because on the console itself the game is virtually unplayable. You really would be lucky to play for more than 5 minutes without the frame rate dropping to about 6 at least once or twice. Once the game is booted up, we are treated to an FMV, although this one strays away from the more usual all computer generated intros of the time by having a green screened woman running around in a dress. From what I've managed to gather, the big giant bogey demon has come to her castle and turned her into 3 fairies. I don't know why, and this is all the information that we are given before we start the game. There might be more information in the instruction manual, but my copy cost me 70p off Amazon, so it didn't really come with one. When the game begins, we are presented with the option to start a new game or enter a code. This is the game's most unique aspect. Hydlide is a roguelike of sorts. The code you can enter will determine the layout of the world map and the item placement, making the game a completely new experience every time you play. Although, despite a random layout, your experience of the game will pretty much be the same each time you play. Without any character introduction or plot setup other than some woman in a dress being kidnapped, you are plonked in a random square of the world map. The first thing to stand out here are the graphics. Everything here is a 2D digitised image operating on a 3D plane, which for the most part looks acceptable, but they lack a few frames of animation to make the character actions seem fluid. The game is exclusively a third-person experience. The camera is always fixed behind our main character, who stays central to his surroundings, which due to the 2D nature of the sprites, can give an effect that rather than our character is progressing forward, everything else is moving around him. You begin with a simple dagger, leather armour and a world map marked with your current objective location. Throughout the game, regardless of the randomised positions of locations, your next objectives will always be clearly pointed to, so it is hard to ever really get lost. Combat in the game comprises of a heavy and light attack mapped to the B and C buttons, and depending on the weapon, a special attack when both are pressed together. You can also block with the A button if you have a shield equipped, and the L and R triggers allow you to strafe from left to right. As every character is a 2D sprite, it is hard to judge at first how close you need to be in order to hit the enemies with your weapon, but it won't take long until you realise that it's pretty much as close as possible. The X button acts as your interaction, and when held also allows you to sprint, and by God can this man run. Usain Bolt, eat your knob off. Your first port of call will be the graveyard, where you are presented with the first real enemies that you are obliged to fight. Scattered around in a small area are certain items, usually a few weapons, potions, scrolls and a shield. Items in the game when acquired are at first only described by what they physically are. For instance, all scrolls until studied further are simply called scroll, and the same goes for potions and tools. Weapons on the other hand have to be equipped in order to display the information regarding to their powers and curses. Unfortunately, and especially at the beginning of the game, weapons and armour may be too heavy to equip to identify, so you are left with an annoying item in your inventory which you are curious to what it might be. Although that is a good thing, it gives you something to carry on playing for. Each area in the game has a key item you need to acquire which gains entry for the next area, and once this item is reached is when your character ascends to a higher level, giving him an increased maximum health and carrying weight. I found this to be a little bit problematic. Whilst in most RPGs your character gains experience points and levels up through battles, here your character gets stronger when he reaches a certain point, and as you run faster than the game can render areas, you are left with very little incentive to ever engage an enemy. However, on your first playthrough at least, you will probably not know where you are immediately going or what you are looking for, so paced exploration will be priority, making enemies more of a threat than if you were simply to run by. After the graveyard level, key locations vary to different interiors, and they all do their best to try and present us with a working 3D environment. The areas themselves would not be out of place on a Sega Mega Drive game. We have a vampire's castle, a dark dungeon, a lava mine, and a hidden fortress, just to name a few, and all seem to fit Hydlide's aesthetic quite well. All except for the last level, but we'll get to that. Playing through this game properly for the first time in 20 years, I thought of it less as a poorly made game, but more of a too overly ambitious one. There are aspects of it which you could interpret as an early incarnation of, say, today's Dark Souls. On paper, it has very similar aspects. It's a third-person action game. You have swords, shields, spells and potions. You gain levels and fight monsters in varying difficulty in numerous areas, and occasionally have a big boss fight. Although that can be said of a lot of games, I doubt From Software ever equated their achievements to a game that included armour quite so ridiculous looking as this. I know it sounds like nitpicking, but look at it! It looks like something you wouldn't stick on the Christmas tree. If you happen to watch my flashback video, you will know that I'm not one for caring about graphics. People have made games recently that hark back to the old 8-bit days, but they all work because of their design, and this is what this game is really lacking. There is just simply no reason for any of this world to exist, even without a narrative. Why would the vampire hold goggles to see inside a hidden castle where a magic lamp is held which illuminates a dungeon where a talisman to repel fire is kept in order to access a lava dungeon where you find a flute to unlock the next area? Having said that, I have played games which made less sense and I enjoyed them, so in the spirit of that I will wrap this up. As an early 3D title, and one not long after the launch of the Sega Saturn, I don't think it's a bad game, I just think it tried way too hard to be something that the developers simply could not make. There are actually some aspects of the game I quite like. Each area has a puzzle element to it. For example, the vampire mansion has orbs that you must find and activate in order to open the final door. The hidden castle has walls that do not appear on the map as missing, so you must discover them yourself. And the final dungeon of the game is a complete maze with teleports, moving blocks and what looks like a hall of mirrors they couldn't render, filled with skeletons. However, the game of course is full of shortcomings. The frame rate is the first obvious issue. The wisps are almost impossible to kill without the right weapon, and I have never for the life of me found a use for the gold. There are apparently fairies you can summon with the pendant in order to trade with them for potions and equipment, but I never found the correct place to do this. I wouldn't say this game is good or bad, it's more of an interesting experiment. It had a lot of ideas that it tried that have been perfected and are standard in games today. For one, it has the ability to save anywhere, which very few games had at the time. If you own a working Sega Saturn and have not played Virtual Hydlide, I wouldn't really recommend it. It's kind of annoying, badly made and doesn't have a sense of direction, but nor is it a highly sought after rare title, and you can pick it up for literally pennies, and I completed it in just under 90 minutes, so maybe check it out. Or maybe don't.